Good. Since it's exactly the time that we've planned for or envisaged as a start of our today's webinar, I would officially now like to welcome you to the webinar. This is actually our sixth webinar that is organized within the CEF's 2018 learning program. And in that sense, I would like to warmly welcome you to our online meeting and especially to give greetings to those participants who are joining us for this topic for the second time since this webinar is the second webinar that we are organizing to cover the topic of implications of the new EU multi-annual financial framework to the Southeast Europe. My name is Tara Vasiljevic, and I will be your facilitator throughout this webinar. But besides me, at this webinar, we will be joined by two lecturers, two presenters, Ms. Mojmir Mrak and Mrs. Gordana Đurović, who together delivering presentations in next hour and a half. Mr. Mojmir Mrak is a professor at the University of Ljubljana, Faculty of Economics, and he has more than 20 years of experience in designing and delivering Slovenian government's policy in international finance and EU accession. In early 1990s, he was the chief external debt negotiator for Slovenia. After what, he served as a chief advisor of Slovenian government on financial aspects towards EU accession of this country. He also coordinated Slovenian government's capacities in respect of 2007-13, 2014-20, and multi-annual financial frameworks of European Union, as well as current efforts of Slovenia towards finalization of the upcoming EU multi-annual financial framework for 2020-2027 period. Besides this, he served as a consultant to numerous international organizations and several countries in Southeast Europe. So in that sense, I would like to now officially also welcome Mr. Mrak for joining us at this webinar. Besides him, we are very, very happy to have here with us also Mrs. Gordana Đurović, who is attending this webinar from Podgorica, from Montenegro. Mrs. Đurović is also a professor at the Faculty of Economics of the University of Montenegro, where he teaches several courses in the field of economic development, EU policies, and international economic relations. He is head of the postgraduate and undergraduate studies in the field of European economic integration. However, in period of 2004 and 2010, Mrs. Đurović served in government of Montenegro as Minister of International Economic Relations and European Integration, Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration, and Minister for European Integration. During this mandate, she had numerous roles, however, several of them that are going to be of very big importance and use during our today's webinar include her leading negotiations about stabilization and association agreement with European Union, national program of integration, communication strategy about European integration, and she coordinated EPA committee for programming of the EU pre-accession assistance. Also, we are very happy to have Mr. Đurović here with us, and once again, warm welcomes to her. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this webinar is, as I said, delivered as a part of the CEF's learning program for 2018. CEF, or Center for Excellence in Finance, is leading learning organization in Southeast Europe, which is towards capacity development of finance officials from 12 Southeast European countries. Our trainings, as you can see, are organized and delivered in 3 different thematic areas. However, having in mind the dynamics that was brought with advanced technologies, we have decided to complement our regular face-to-face activities and workshops here delivered in Ljubljana with the online courses and webinars. And this webinar is actually part of this larger effort that we are trying to deliver and design in this and coming years. In that sense, we kindly invite you to register at CEF Online Learning Campus, because this is the only way you will be regularly updated about the all online learning possibilities that are offered here in our institution. Attendance in online courses and webinars is free of charge, and there are no limitations in numbers of participants. So in that sense, you're very much encouraged to also invite your colleagues to join us for these or similar meetings. Before we go any further, I would like to very quickly give you several technical instructions that will be needed for this webinar. As you first have seen, the first thing you have to do in order to hear us during the webinar is to click this Connect to Audio. This is the only way to enable your speakers and microphone. And the second thing is regarding the sound. So we kindly ask you to keep yourself unmuted. This way, we want to maintain the quality of the sound throughout the webinar as high as possible. So only a person who is speaking at the moment and delivering presentations will be unmuted. However, everyone else should be muted. Also, we invite you to turn your camera, because this is the nicest way that we meet and cooperate closer. And the final features is this chat box that you have seen in your screen in WebEx. And here we strongly encourage you to leave all the comments, questions, and observations that you have for our presenters. You can leave these questions at any time during their presentations, and afterwards I will read one by one the questions that you have we have received, and our presenters will be answering to them. This webinar will be recorded, and its recording will be available to you or anyone else within the next 2 days. As I mentioned at the very beginning, this webinar is a continuation of effort that we have been striving for since the beginning of this year. Namely, we have already delivered one webinar in March this year. It was also focused on implications of the new multi-annual financial framework of the European Union for Southeast European countries. In this webinar, we have discussed the expectations about it, and also we have put some emphasis on how new European Commission's Western Balkan strategy would be fitting within this multi-annual financial framework. However, with this webinar, we go a step further. I will take a closer look into the proposal of the multi-annual financial framework that has been published at the very beginning of May by the European Commission. But let's take a closer look into how the dynamic of our webinar is going to look. So first start with the presentation of Mr. Moermrak, who will tell us the features, elements, and some expectations and novelties within the multi-annual financial framework. Afterwards, we continue with the second presentation when Mrs. Đurović will tell us more about regional experiences in utilization of IPA funds. As well, within this presentation, we'll try to find some recommendations on how to implement the lessons learned from IPA 2 towards making IPA 3 more efficient and effective. Finally, at the very end, as I said, we will have enough time for your questions so that presenters can answer all the details or particularities that were interesting for you on this topic or during their presentations. Once again, I strongly encourage you to leave your comments here in the chat box at any time. And then when time comes, I will read your questions out loud and provide the answers. Without any intention to keep further the official start of the webinar, I invite Mr. Mojmir Mrak to start with the presentation number 1.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad that we are back together. As I was explaining, we are meeting now for the second time, discussing the multi-annual financial framework for the post-2020 period. Those one who were with us the first time in March, we discussed what were basically the issues on the table, and we already announced at that time that we will discuss once available a little bit more precisely what the Commission has proposed and what is now on the table for the discussion, first among the member states and then later on, of course, an agreement with the Parliament and to be ready for the implementation by 2021. I will try to address in this half an hour time these basic issues which are here on this transparency. Well, we are talking about the financial perspective for the period 2021-2027, but if we talk about them, it is still good, appropriate to put this into the context of longer-term budget strengths of the EU. So that's the way how we will be able then to see to what extent this proposal of the Commission is different from the previous ones. We will see that there were announcements that the difference will be substantial. I think we will be able to judge then together when we will go through this to make an assessment where we are on this. You will find here the second alinea major challenges for the medium-term financial perspective. This is in effect a repetition, so I will not spend much time from the first presentation because the issues I think we have to be aware of under what circumstances then the Commission was proposing, what is now on the table. And then of course the key feature of today's of my presentation are the major characteristics of the Commission's proposal, which as it was already mentioned, which came out at the beginning of May and on which there are already now going on a lot of activities come, to an advanced stage of the negotiations. We'll comment here a little bit on the issue of the clusterings of the member states, even though it is still a little bit early, but I think the Commission proposal already gives us a little bit of a sense where things will go similarly as before and where we can expect some major changes. And what I can say, there will be major changes. And of course, last but not least, the negotiations timetable. Here, of course, I will explain what is the logic, where is it, when certain things are expected to happen. But of course, we'll then also have a chance to talk what if this does not happen by the time what is scheduled here. I want to underline here that all the data taken in this presentation, so all the graphs and tables are taken directly from the Commission's documents, and they were also taken from the European Parliament, but more in the context that they were sometimes organized a little bit differently. So it's important to underline that these are the graph tables taken from the documents which are on the table for the negotiations. They are not yet assessment of this, but that's where we are starting from. A few things about the long-term budget trends. Well, EU budget has been particularly from the beginning of medium-term financial perspective, so from the end of 80s, somewhere at the level a little bit over 1% of GNI. We can also easily say GDP of the European Union. Just to have sense, this roughly, if we take national public finances and the EU public finances through the EU budget, we will find out that the EU budget represents not more than 2% of total public finances at the EU level. So we are talking in relative terms about relatively small proportions, but of course the nominal figures are not that small. So we are talking about a level around 1%. So this has not changed, if we can say, over the decades. What did change over the decades has been the structure. If you have 100 as a total, you see that within the structure there were significant changes, and I mention here particularly the big change on the one side that the cohesion has increased significantly its proportion. That's because EU has been traditionally enlarging with the countries, which has developed than the EU average, and that was obvious, and the political pressure for these funds have been increasing. On the other side, the common agricultural policy has gone down. But you add up cohesion and common agricultural policy, that was practically throughout this period together, roughly 70–75% of the EU budget. So the EU budget on the expenditure side strongly dominated by these two features, by these two categories, and we will see what's happening now with this thing. All the other programs, as you have here on the table, you see they did increase a little bit. What are these other programs? I think here is more or less the issues related to the competitiveness of the EU, research and development. These are also the issues related to the external actions, but as you see, they have increased a bit, but not dramatically. Significant changes also on the revenue side, where I will just the last 2018. So as you see, this green path in this table, this is basically the share of funding which is being funded from what is called GNI source, what means with the contributions from member states. Beginning of the EU budget was more or less financed with customs duties collected. Now customs duties and these similar things represent around 10–15%. So we see quite significant changes in this respect. You have also one graph which shows you where we are today in the financial perspective with the so-called net budgetary position. Why are they important? They are important because they have, in a way, pretty much guided the negotiations. Everybody was on one side looking at how much he will pay or she will pay, and on the other side what he or she will get. And this is basically the situation at this moment, as we see largest net payer in billion terms is the Germany. UK also significant net payer. Don't forget that UK is leaving us, so this will have significant implications on the budget. And we have on the revenues, on the net inflow side, particularly the countries which are significant recipients of the cohesion funds. So this is useful to have a look. March recipients from the EU budget, new EU member states. When I say new, I'm talking about those ones joining 2004, 2007, and here, of course, is also Croatia joining us a little bit later. As far as I will here just mention two of them because we discussed them last time quite a bit. One is, of course, Brexit. We have money available. We said that the UK was a significant net payer, so we expect somewhere between 10–15 billion less contribution in the post-2001 period. UK leaving the EU. And on the side, we have an entirely new priorities which have been not budgeted till now, also today. Issues related like migration, security issues, they don't have practically a budget line in the current financial perspective. So EU is strongly, I would say, challenged with a number of external issues. Globalization is a little bit traditional, but things which are going on in the US, in the neighborhoods, Russia, Turkey on one side, and internal challenges were basically the one related to the migration crisis, to the Eurozone crisis, competitiveness issues. So I would say these challenges are to a certain extent old one, but quite a number is a completely new one. So this is, what the Commission had on the table when they were basically presenting their proposal. So here is the basic, I would say, kind of the bird view on the EU budget proposal, which we have on the table, which came out at the beginning of May. Here, first slides shows you what actually happened with size of the EU budget. The Commission was, I would say, very careful in this respect, so they presented all this data in two ways. One was in current prices, and another one was in 2018 prices. What, of course, makes logical if you have kind of constant price. That's the only way that you can things logically. And so I would here draw your attention to the right part of this graph, which shows basically a comparison of the existing, of the current financial price, current financial perspective, and the proposal of the European Commission. And you will see that de facto the two financial perspectives are, in terms of the size, more or less equal. Of course, we have to be here aware the financial perspective be without the UK, so it means that if it is now equal, there is a need for the others to fill part of this gap. And on the other side, of course, the GDP is a little bit higher. There is one conceptual difference between when we talk about the size of the budget, comes to the existing financial perspective, where money for the European Development Fund, this was basically the money which is aimed at supporting more or less development assistance in the developing countries, has not been integral part of the budget. Now it is. So that's the reason why this is put in this way. So if we take in both cases this fund included, we are more or less in the same size of the budget 2014-20 and 21-27. But let's move to the structural side, where we will see significant changes. Before I go to the shares to show you the numbers, the figures, I would like to draw your attention to this change in the main headings of the EU midterm financial perspective from 2021 on. What are headings? Headings are basically large expenditure items. You see, if you look at the current financial perspective, it does have 5 expenditure items, 5 big expenditure items, 5 headings. The new has 7 of them. Interesting to go here a little bit more in detail. What you will see that basically in the 21-27, number 1 and 2 are more or less similar as we had in what we have in the current financial perspective as 1A and 1B. The reason for this change, I would say the major local reason for this is that everything what is number 1 is things which are related to the competitiveness issues. These are the issues like the research and development. Then you have many other issues in this respect. This is the money which is being allocated among the member states centrally. So it will be allocated to member states through either the biddings or through some other ways, but centrally. Cohesion, we all more or less know what cohesion is. Now, cohesion is also allocated to member states more or less through the country envelopes. So I think this makes a logical distinction between these two. In substance terms, I would say the second major change is this what has been in the current financial perspective under security and citizenship. Now you see here, instead of this, you have two new base headings. One is migration and border management, and another one is security and defense. Clearly shows you the priority, the political priority, which is given now to these new challenges the EU is being faced in the context of the migration, in the context of the security, defense issues, Schengen, and so on. So they were given also in terms of the headings a very prominent role here. The issue what we are interested here, when we'll discuss later on IPA, you see there is no conceptually big difference. Global Europe, in the financial perspective, has been in a way transformed into the neighborhood and the world. Terminology is different, but we are talking about the instrument where money is allocated outside of the EU, of course, for the objectives related to the EU. And here, of course, as we will see later on, IPA is part of this part. So this is concerning the issues. Of course, if you will go to the document from the Commission, here you have, I would say, this is a very famous table. This is now the table for the negotiations. When we will end up negotiations, we will have a similar table, but of course, at that moment, agreed among the member states. We can now already start to discuss what will change, but I personally don't think it will change in the terms of the structure of the financial frameworks, but of course, in terms of the size, there will be definitely, I would say, strong discussions. Here we have a graph which shows you, the right side of this graph tells you the structure of the Commission's proposal, and this is again compared with the existing financial perspective. So again, 5 priorities, 5 headings now, 7 headings later on, and through this you see very nicely that, of course, the 2 major policies, which used to be 75% of the EU budget, I'm talking here about the cohesion, number 2, and the natural resources and environment, which is a nice word by and large for common agricultural policy. If you put together, their share goes down. Then be careful, share and nominal figures can be very different. You can have the same share, but in nominal terms, that would mean an increase because the GDP is increasing. So we can say that there were quite significant changes in the structure, maybe not to the extent that some countries would like, but we have to admit that the proposal does take on board, does address these challenges which we face. Is this to a sufficient extent? This is, of course, subject of discussions. Few words, few basic features of the structure. Yes, cohesion, natural resources, and the single market, or if you want the competitiveness, they do still continue to feature the largest portion. If we go back, this is very clearly the 1, 2, and 3. But this proportion, if you add up 1, 2, and 3, is smaller than it used to be. We do have a significant increase of security-related expenditures, external actions heading. Is part of this external actions heading. Somebody will say, yes, but this, if I go again back, but these are still relatively small parts. That's correct, but we have to know that particularly the security-related expenditures in the existing financial perspective were practically zero. So we are starting from practically zero, so this increase is not that small, but it shows very clearly certain conceptual challenges which the EU is exposed to and which the proposal of the Commission starts to address. A little bit more specific issues I would like to mention. There were simply too many that for this kind of the presentation cannot fit in this. I would underline one specific thing which is in this competitiveness issue is the so-called EU Invest. This is basically a even stronger support to even through the EU budget for investments in the EU member states, mainly through the European Investment Bank, the national, they are called promotional banks. It is obviously that this is still a response to the crisis where the investments have gone down significantly, and we do have a very strong, I would say, even pressure now that more and more funds which have been given for cohesion will be given for cohesion in the form of something what is called financial instruments, but basically means that the money which is used for cohesion will be only partly spent in the form of subsidies. Another part will be basically used for loans, which will have then to be repaid, of course, and then of course this money can be reused again. So that's one thing which is getting, I would say, a very strong ponder here in this financial perspective. Well, as far as cohesion is concerned, I mentioned the general feature is that the cohesion in relative terms is going down, but in nominal terms remains more or less at the same level, but with a quite significantly adjusted methodology for allocation of funds. So, including financial perspective, the methodology for allocation of funds was called on something what was called Berlin methodology, and it was basically a methodology which was by and large focused on per capita GDP. So the per capita GDP was the key for selecting regions in the Eurozone, in the EU area, in the European Union, who are eligible for getting cohesion funds or for getting larger proportion of cohesion funds. This methodology, which has remained more or less unchanged for the last at least three multilateral financial perspective, they are now being, this methodology is being adjusted. There is an issue of migration coming in with a stronger proportion. There is an issue of education coming stronger there. And there is one other issue here which I would like to underline, the use of the cohesion funds. I think it will be an issue of big discussions, negotiations. We'll have there the conditionality principle involved, that the use of the cohesion funds will be in a way conditioned by performing well in terms of the economic and fiscal issue. You are talking here about European semester. We are talking here about the fiscal adjustments which is going on in a number of countries. So link of the cohesion and macro is very, very clear. Well, another thing, very important one, not that much in terms of the size, but in terms of the conceptual issues. We have now two entirely new instruments in the financial perspective. One is to support European Monetary Union. This is, if those who follow these things a little bit more closer will remember that Mr. Juncker has announced in autumn last year, that for the EMU we need Eurozone budget and so on, and that the new EU budget should be a kind of the beginning for this. And this area in this EU budget is in a way kind of the beginning of the Eurozone budget. We can discuss this if there will be an issue. Personally, I have a question. Is this part of the EU budget? Is this the issue for the Eurozone member states alone? And so on. This very topic was the issue of discussion yesterday between Mrs. Merkel and Macron related to the to the reform of the Eurozone infrastructure. There's also another instrument which is aimed specifically to support structural reforms, and this I think makes sense. Quite substantial amount of money is here, and it is basically to stimulate countries for the reforms. There are changes in terms of being more environmentally oriented. What I found unfortunate from my perspective, that the cap is going down, but within going down, even more go down are the funds for rural development, which I don't see really as a welcome information. but that is in the proposal. I know that a number of countries will be strongly against this move. Revenue side. Well, revenue side, we are seeing always a little bit of a repetition. If you remember, the EU budget is largely financed with the contributions of member states. This is roughly 75% of the EU budget, and always a negotiation starts with a proposal of the Commission with some new resources. Now, this package of the new resources includes the one which are mentioned here. Let's be frank here, altogether, if all this will be implemented, these sources will contribute roughly 30% to the EU budget revenues. So, of course, it's a welcome revenue, but still this will not drastically change the structure. So the EU budget will continue to be dominated by the contributions from the states. One thing which, if you remember from the first seminar, which was kind of announced, was that the UK rebate will be eliminated. Yes, now the Commission proposes to eliminate the UK rebate. Unfortunately, there is a part which I don't like too much, is that it will be eliminated, but we still have some other rebates which are in existence today. What the Commission does propose is that these other rebates, which are technically rebates on UK rebates, should be phased off throughout the next few years. Obviously, the Commission was the opinion that this drastic elimination would politically not be feasible. I agree with this political argument, but of course, I think we have a unique opportunity to get rid of the rebates if there is a kind of a phased-out approach. As far as IPA is concerned, I mentioned that IPA is part of this heading related to the external actions. The heading as such has increased quite significantly. So in contrast to the EU budget, which is going down as a total, and within this increase, we also see, I would say, a smaller increase of the pre-accession. So we are now already talking about the IPA 3. And I would say in terms of the size, we are talking about the IPA 3 on the by and large the same level as we were knowing it from the financial perspective of 2014-2020. What I think from the financial, from the nominal point of view, from this point of view, is to show that Commission is committed to this pre-enlargement, this enlargement process. Of course, the IPA seems to be strongly dominated, at least through the proposal, with these flagship initiatives in the West Balkan strategy, which came out in beginning of February this year. So I think I'm sure that Professor Đurović will address this a little bit later on in more details. Just for the finish, two comments on we will basically again have negotiations in two groups of countries. We do have net payers here, where I have mentioned this already, that at least France and Germany are today a little bit more flexible to move above 1% the total size of the EU budget, while you have the first reactions of the Austrian Prime Minister and also of the Netherlands Prime Ministers, Finnish authorities, is that the Commission's proposal is simply not realistic, that 1.11 what the Commission proposes is too much. So basically they stick to this 1% ceiling. So we have already noticed here that we will discuss one of the issues for the negotiations will be to go from the Commission's proposals down. And of course, whenever you talk going down, the question is where to cut. So I think we will get into the same picture here. We have to be aware here that Austria is the next country which is in the presidency. which will, of course, have also an impact, in my view, on this discussion. As far as cohesion group is concerned, this cohesion group will be definitely less coherent than it was before. Let's just give you a brief presentation of the Commission's proposal related to the cohesion. And in the in this third column, you see the change per country for the cohesion allocations between 2014-20 and now what Commission proposes. And you see the drastic reductions, particularly for some new EU member states. We are talking here about figures going over 20%. And on the other side, you do have countries which are under the Commission proposal will get more cohesion funds than in the existing financial proposal. I'm talking here particularly about the countries like Greece. So in a way, there was a discussion already before that the cohesion will move a little bit from the east to south, and this proposal goes a little bit on this lines. This is the last slide. Timeline. This is the official timeline, and I think we all hope that this will go ahead, that this will stick to this. Commission came out with a proposal in May this year. Now what is going on, the legislative acts are being published practically on a weekly basis. So we in the member states are now, I would say, flooded with these documents coming out on each of these headings, because we have to reach not just the agreement on the figures, but also on the legal procedure for this. Very important in the context of the timing will be the European Council's decision next week. We have European Council, the presidents of states and governments meet next week, and one issue on the table will be what timetable to follow. If they will come to the conclusion that I would say that an ambitious timetable should be followed, and this is the timetable which is presented here, then of course the Austrian presidency will have a much more important role here than if the decision is that we basically take the position that we will not be able to get an agreement by December this year, and then we will of course have to wait for the agreement for the new European Parliament to be acted. We are talking next year, and the new Commission to be put in place. That would be very unfortunate, because then under this scenario we would have an agreement only in spring 2020, which is of course simply too late for effective implementation of this. So I would like very much that this proposal, which is on the table, which is official, would actually go ahead, but don't forget, we need an agreement of all EU member states to support this. The medium-term financial perspective can be agreed only with the consensus, and this consensus discussing what we were working here will not be probably very easy to reach. That much, Tara, back to you for the beginning.
For this thorough overview. Before going to the next presentation, that will focus more towards countries that are candidates or potential candidates in EU. Can you please tell us from your current experience, since you were involved in the process, as we've said at the beginning, of negotiations from Slovenian side of this multi-annual financial framework. Maybe just a few sentences about the biggest concerns, let's say, of the EU candidate countries here in the region about the proposal of European Commission. As we saw, the cohesion policy is significantly changed and reduced for Slovenia, 11%, as I saw. So maybe in this regard, how does this operationally influences Slovenian plans and its multi-annual or medium-term budget framework?
Well, Slovenia have, I would say, have been really well prepared for the negotiations. Those one who were with us in the first seminar, I was presenting a little bit about the scenarios we were making, and it was very clear to us that the EU budget will not be larger, that we do have new priorities, and I must say that we in Slovenia are supporting these new priorities. And of course, you are realistic. The same amount of money with new priorities, then of course you have to reduce funds from certain existing priorities. I think for us it is not a surprise what the Commission has proposed. We were, of course, hoping that the Commission will go with a little bit larger budget as a proposal, and then, of course, then the cuttings on the cohesion funds will not be that much as they were. But of course, we do understand this proposal. But as I said, it will be the issue of the negotiations. You see very clearly from this table on the cohesion that it is not realistic to expect that the cohesion group will be so coherent as it was in the previous negotiations, because also the concerns are different. Let's be frank, the cohesion policy has addressed a lot of concerns of the new member states in the previous two financial perspectives. Let's just look at that today. The gap between the developments of the, let's say, the Visegrad countries and the EU average is much lower than it was. So it's anymore the argument that there is no need for the cohesion. But I think it's very difficult to argue that this cannot be going down a little bit, particularly in the context that we do have all new priorities, which until now have not been budgeted at all. So, yeah, I think we in Slovenia, in this respect, look at this proposal as a realistic one. But yeah, I think it will create a lot of challenges. You know, the English term, the challenges is a very nice one, but it will create a lot of problems to reach the agreement. But I think also internally within individual countries.
For the answer, let's continue the discussion after the second presentation. In sense, I would like to invite Professor Đurović from calling us from Podgorica to continue with her presentation that will focus on the lessons learned and regional experiences in utilization of IPA 2 funds in a recent period.
Thank you, Tara. Hope you hear me. Okay, good day, everybody, to all colleagues, and I wish you, of course, success work with these nice webinars also in the future. I will try to share with you my recent work on one project called Lesson Learned from IPA 2 to IPA 3. It is part of GIZ activities in Southeast Europe, concretely in our region, so for the 6 beneficiaries, to promote European integration not only through the negotiation itself or some other phase of integration, but also through the strong support through pre-accession assistance and link with the dynamic of adoption of European standards. So in approaching to this new proposal of the Commission, I was involved in this project as somebody who visits all 6 countries, and through the interviews, desk research, and one comprehensive questionnaire, try to collect new data as additional unique voice from the region, how we see all this process, how we fit to all these changes, and what we can expect from the new financial perspective based on our lessons learned. Still, this project is ongoing, but I can share with you some of my findings. As IPA 2 instrument for our region and Turkey, partly it was also for other countries, that's it. it is one important, usually the biggest donor in each country in the region, and it's part of our enlargement strategy, or EU enlargement strategy, but our joining. Through this process, through the IPA support per country, it's a strong contribution for the European integration process. And it is kind of continuity with IPA 1 and previously with CARDS. Now we are waiting, of course, for the new proposal, and we try to follow whole changes which are in that process. As most of you probably are familiar with that, European Commission, based on the regulation, was obliged to prepare midterm review about evaluation of IPA 2. But because of at the beginning of whole process, that evaluation was a little earlier than it was a picture of the implementation of the IPA 2, but it's of course very valuable, and it was transparently shared with all interested parties. With that now decides to revise the process, but with focus on our region, so we see it. From midterm evaluation, what we can confirm that it was again voice from our countries is that IPA overall fits for purpose and corresponds to EU priorities for the first beneficiary needs. IPA 2 is focused on promoting key reforms, 3 pillars of enlargement, of course, flow, economic governance, and but our countries, government side, are not so happy with this collection of civil society facility on regional IPA, quite important amount of money. For that, is implemented, and the new mechanism through the direct budget support, which has improved strategic focus on IPA 2, but implementation still is quite uneven across sectors and beneficiaries. So part of this evaluation was related to analysis of models of implementation, not only direct management, but also different indirect modes. For the first indirect modes with including beneficiary countries, and analysis why there are still some longer delay in project implementation, not only in Turkey but also in our region, and of course a new instrument as a performance network, and key performance indicators involved to monitor the process and quality of implementation, specifically on local level. Also, it is concluded that there are insufficient quality of data collection in beneficiaries. As I mentioned, the objective of this project is using this methodology, find some joint lesson learned to detect it and to develop some recommendation and findings for countries in the region, how to improve and benefited even more from this valuable and important instrument as part of the enlargement strategy. Now the model was questionnaire. So in 6 towns, visiting IPA offices and the ministries of finance, there are units for this contracting and financing units, and this is just structure of the sample. It was about 42 questions online to fill, and we had 120 respondees. Talk about sector approach for the first just shortly to share with you some findings. Quality of the prepared sector planning documents is evaluated on the scale of 1 to 5 as 3.2. Little is regarding sequencing of IPA 2 actions, but quality of the implementation is little lower, so 2.9. 54 respondents consider that SBDs as instrument for sectors and for programming also could be used as instruments for a new multi-annual financial framework. 78% respondents see that sector budget support also as a tool for strengthening the capacities for implementation in absorption of funds. Regarding formal adoption of document, respondees are quite divided. Most of them said that it is not necessary to adopt it officially by government because it is flexible model and can be changed. Even these months, even in all countries, there are process of revising of this document. If we compare shortly how we are going from IPA 2 to IPA 3, I tried to compare that objectives are more or less the same. They are supporting countries on their way towards the EU membership. But from sectors, we now still talk about key priorities and specific objectives. As it was regarding headings, we also have some changes regarding key priorities. So first, strong group is rule of law and political criteria, including anti-corruption and other aspects of criteria. But was for me interesting to see also in this new proposal regarding key priorities, policies and acquis, somehow a mix of IPA 1 technical assistance and rule standard policies and practices, which means that how I read it is that still there are a lot of free room for legal harmonization, a lot of homework for our region. So this line keep this technical assistance in one priority line for that purposes. Socioeconomic development, of course, is also very important for a region, specifically because of level of openness of our market and level of integration, economic integration. Investment for growth is somehow linked with all this additional initiative for infrastructure projects, Berlin process and other, and reconciliation, good neighborly relations, and regional and cross-border cooperation. More or less, it is the same as in previous period. So some changes, but not so big. In the strategy papers, also under revision in each country, useful instrument for future long-term perspective process, and of course, more or less quite well needs of beneficiaries. The strategy papers format should be also used as a strategic documents for the new financial perspective. 50% agree for that, but significant part, about 21 respondents, say that maybe we should think about some new formats. About impacts of the flagship initiatives, Professor Mrak also mentioned it in previous presentations. It's part of credible enlargement strategy from February this year. Phase regarding importance of flagship initiative is given to strengthen the rule of law. So chapter 23 and 24, political criteria and balance clause for overall negotiation dynamic. And economy, supporting socioeconomic development, connectivity, Berlin process, freeing maybe once we achieve it. And then reconciliation, neighborhood relation, and the security and migration. It is a hierarchy of respondents. Aspects. One little political question was about readiness and support of countries for the strengthening of IPA structures. Majority of respondents said that they are concerned about political and financial support for strengthening of IPA structures. 58%. Quite less is positive and optimistic regarding that, but also 9% and 6% they are seriously concerned about political and financial support. Case that some reallocations in period 18-20 can be delegated to our countries. Are we ready to absorb it? That additional funding? Majority says 71% that additional staff needed, which means that we have we still have problem with the capacities and the stability of capacities within the IPA structure in the region. We also discussed in previous presentation if we can expect some raising in conditionality, specifically connected to law and political criteria, how it can impact on dynamic of absorption and quality of implementation. Most of the respondees are not so happy with raising of conditionalities, and they think that no doubt that that process could delay implementation of some actions. Talk about voice of the region. Part of the process of programming, of course, we are not, but do we need to be asked about what our real needs, how it fits with our priorities, how we can develop coherence between economic reform process, like the European semester for the Balkan, and the priorities of integration process. In any of these aspects, we like to be also considered as interested party in that. Results, okay, all of us agrees about that, but what are the main results, where we can detect the best result? This is how respondents answer on that. So for the first, improving cooperation and good neighborly relation, important part of process of IPA is that, and the institutional building. Through IPA process, we are preparing IPA programs, we are preparing our countries for institutional building and they for criteria for the cohesion policy. Others are a little less evaluated, but also important as objectives of IPA 2 and its implementation. The lowest score is for the political reforms. In the descriptive part of the questionnaires and during the interviews, unfortunately, most of the respondees and interviewed person, they said that IPA is not so strong regarding dynamic of democratic reforms and overall political reforms. So they see it more as administrative capacity building, legal harmonization, infrastructure, and economic reforms. Other questions which are also part of this project and on which we are responding, it is, for instance, policy objectives. Are they achieved effectively and efficiently? Programming and implementation of IPA systems, how we are organized, how are our structure effective, what about sectoral working groups, what about their roadmaps, what about their impacts and the sustainability of financing system, financial assistance, monitoring, problems of repeating of some projects, how to avoid it in the future, serious risk of some decommitments of funds, independence of audit authority and their functionality, model of indirect management to be implemented, how to improve relation with delegation, with commission. Specifically for me, it was interesting that in some countries, I heard that they like to have more communication with other DGs, not only with the DG for neighborhood enlargement, but also for a DG Regio, for DG Agri, for some other, to specify that communication, because if one candidate country like to learn more about cohesion policy, then the best place is other DGs, not only because they are more diplomatic than really experienced in some common EU policies. And they cause some delays in communication channel. But of course, it needs to summarize all of these answers and somehow to systemize that, and it will be part of our general findings. Things I put on the last slide. So it is, for instance, about EU cohesion policy, and specifically for the countries such as Montenegro and Serbia with open accession negotiation. So chapter 22 is very important. It's quite horizontal, and the administrative capacities for those issues and for the closing benchmarks is really important, specifically for smaller countries such as Montenegro. What good instrument? It is annual reporting of IPA implementation, IPA 2 assistance. The country prepared it, and their process of improving of those documents. What is I think is real dynamic changes in the NIPAC office, in the NIPAC structure. Specifically, if we talk about key positions, it was recently case also in Montenegro, and even changes of the organizational structure of the whole NIPAC office, not only a key position. So it always somehow destabilizes institutional memory and communication mode. Interesting document also is an own regional document produced by some countries called Learned, for instance, in implementing indirect management. One very interesting document they produced, for instance, in Macedonia, and I think that it can be as a model how to improve and how to avoid mistakes in previous implementation processes. Ask a lot of questions about sector approach and how to improve it. Sector working groups and line ministries, their role, how to motivate them to be closer process, and of course few questions about donor coordination platforms and how to improve it in each country. Communication with the delegation and the commission, and of course what was expected in each country. It is problem with the high turnover rate of staff, and it is linked with retention policy. We are familiar with one very good document, policy paper regarding retention policy. In some countries, it is in the process of the preparation. We have some experiences in IPA 13, but next period for the finalization of accession negotiation and for a real discussion about future position of the country within the EU after fulfilling of criteria, of course, and finishing of accession negotiation, I think retention policy will be really an issue for the countries of enlargement. Finally, political support, always important issue for capacity building. Mentioned in the case, for instance, of Montenegro, with the new model, I think it is our sixth model of the organization of the EU integration structure. Prime Minister directly plays some responsibility for the NIPAC because now they are removed from a ministry to Prime Minister cabinet. It is quite a new model for us, and do hope it will function. But it means personal responsibility of Prime Minister for better coordination of IPA programming and implementation in a country. So do hope that this document will follow the process of adoption, and as Professor Mrak mentioned, this first scenario for Austrian presidency and December 2018, in the case that it will be completed, will be no doubt very good news also for our region. This for my side, enough.
Thank you much for the presentation and giving us this very nice regional overview of the situation in IPA implementation. However, we have received one question now from Serbia, who is, as we heard, among other countries, facing quite a problem with or challenge in administrative capacities that are needed to support IPA management and staff retention problems, as we heard also from you. So would you be able to, in a few more sentences, give us some more insights about the regional experiences in this regard? We've heard the changes that happened in Montenegro, but do you have any other countries from the region, examples that could be good for these two fields.
Some experiences to solve it as a sustainable solution, but unfortunately it is not the case in any country. It is not as a permanent solution. So from time to time some structure were involved in, for instance, based on loan salaries, on some specific decision of government. They had some variable amount of the salary as working on specific issues such as programming and implementing of IPA. But it is not a stable solution in the sense that it is for each budget year. Other idea was to try to delegate it as for the regional IPA for some more flexible model through this EU budget, not through the national budgets. But I'm a little skeptical that it can be the case. So maybe it is good again to repeat it to national authorities, to governments, to think about it, because this moving from the IPA structure, in spite of the huge investment and very attractive job, is a reality, and we need to fight against that.
Much. And now I would like to invite a Serbian representative here at the webinar, Mr. Ivan Knežević, share with us very quickly, let's say, country-specific experiences with IPA that, let's see, correlates more or less with what we have heard as a regional overview. Mr. Knežević, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank to Mr. Mrak and Mrs. Đurić for the excellent presentations and insight in what is going on in current negotiation on the next multi-annual perspective, and also thank you, Mr. Đurić, for this excellent regional insight. Using of IPA funds in the countries of the region. Very briefly, as Serbia is concerned, we are sharing all these problems that Mr. Đurić already said. The most issue is staff turnover within the structures who are dealing with the IPA funds here in the country. Into the data, the turnover rates are about 10%, and taking into account the specific work that those people are doing, is time-consuming and has a negative adverse effect on the implementation capacities, change of this turnover of this employed staff with the administration. I also agree that salary is one of the issue, and I think that national administration should pay much more attention to this issue and requires really political will and political support in solving this issue in permanent and long-term basis, because this is, as we heard Mr. Đurić, there was some short-term solutions which proved to be ineffective. So retention policy and especially salary policy as a part of this retention policy should receive much more political support and attention in order to resolve this issue, improve the capacities for efficient absorption of IPA 2 funds, but also in case of Serbia and Montenegro, it is very important for the preparation for management of the future European structural and investment funds. And the other parts of the IPA implementation system in Serbia is the pre-accession fund for the last 18 years. However, the first strengthening of the absorption capacity, especially the indirect management, is needed. Institutional framework is set and it is operational. Serbia received the of IPA funds in March 2014, and for IPA in 2018, Serbia has been entrusted with the budget implementation task for 2 investment measures, and for the rest, the preparations are undergoing. The same is also for framework that it is set up and it is operational. Serbia delivered all required programming documents in all policy, IPA policies. However, improvements in this area is also needed because we have still a very large number of sectoral strategies. So the coherence and the quality of the strategic framework should be improved also in this area. As far as the evaluation, the system also established and its evaluation. However, take into account that this is has been an option for the Serbian administration. Further capacity building in the area of evaluation is needed. The very good practice that we have in Serbia is include stakeholders, especially civil society organization, to be present at the IPA monitoring committees, which are organized here with the administration. We are discussing on the implementation issues regarding IPA approved programs. This is something that that is good practice. However, I would come to the presentation. The major, according to my opinion, the major issue which has to be urgently resolved is the retention of staff, especially when we see the figures of the absorption of the IPA 2 funds, where we can see that there is a slow tendering, and I think is a problem, and that there is a pressure on contracting and financing unit in the Ministry of Finance to get and to fulfill all necessary tasks in a very time frame, and for some of approved programs, the contracting dates are approaching, while contracting dates are still on the lower level. Therefore, I hope that in the framework of the negotiation of Chapter 22, this red policy will be further developed and strengthened. However, some urgent measures are needed in order to strengthen this part of the administrative capacity in Serbia.
For overview from Serbia, Mrs. Đurić, maybe any feedback on what we have heard so far? Also, Professor Mojmir. Maybe you could share with us experience of Slovenia. As you have been involved in the process of accession of Slovenia towards European Union, how this problem was handled here? Maybe you have some experiences that could be of a practical use or advice for the rest of the countries. I can see that you are, but you have to unmute your microphone first.
I can, in the meantime, if you have a...
Do.
Professor Jur?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure. Still your technology. I'd just like to comment on what was linked between new member states and future member states from our region, if I may say. So if we remember together, original cohesion countries were Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and Greece. So the new member states from Eastern Europe, they somehow create free room in the cohesion policy for the Eastern Europe. Now problems are moving again on the south. So new member states from the Central and Eastern Europe now realistically recognize that the vulnerable part of the European Union, overall Europe, not again on the south, on the Mediterranean region. So not only Greece again, but also now Italy, again Spain and Portugal, and these joint issues as Frontex, security, migration, and linked issue to refugee crisis. So I think that this new budget and EPA in the context of new budget shows that need for the additional solidarity, issue of solidarity to be delegated to all, and a new reality of problems in Europe are linked with the Mediterranean region. So in that context, having EPA higher in relative and absolute amount in comparison with previous national perspective, I think it is also good sign for countries for our region that unfortunately we are also part of the problems. We are not only part of the solution. So focus on this region unfortunately will be quite high in the new perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. Professor Moimir, can you hear us now? Unfortunately, we cannot hear you still. So I have another question before we try to find a solution for the sound in another office here. We heard on several occasions that additional focus will be put to the effectiveness and efficiency of the projects that are going to be funded. That means that in coming period we should expect a bit more of monitoring of the projects, monitoring of their efficiency, a bit regular evaluations of them, and since this is, as we heard here in Slovenia, also on several occasions, something that European Commission intends to do also for the member states to have a better control. So is it something that we should expect also from the candidate and potential candidate countries for utilization of the funds given to them?
In the new IPA 3, also Moimire?
Ja, se čujemo.
Okay,
ja.
Čujemo se.
Dobro. Okay, and a little bit on the previous question, then maybe come to this one. I think comparisons of the pre-accession process at the time we were joining and today are quite different. They're not the same, but I would say at that time the programs, the whole EPA was much more geared towards really preparing country for the acquis implementation. It was much more geared toward preparation for the country for joining the EU in a relatively short period of time. And that was very clear from the instruments which were provided at that time. I think over the last medium-term financial perspectives, I would say, especially with the last one, the one which we are in, is that the EPA has to a significant extent become an instrument which is basically supporting the good governance, the issues which are, of course, very important for a country, but sometimes they are not really directly associated closely with the EU accession. So it's, you know, if we talk about the sector budget support, this is an instrument which has been implemented, well, I'd say for more than a decade in some other parts of the world. You say that the instrument is very useful, but it's not, how would I say, specifically geared towards the EU accession. So I say it's difficult to compare. One basic difference is that today the EPA is much more, the pre-accession instrument is much more a policy instrument than it was in our time. And it was, I would say, much more a technical instrument to get ready, particularly for the use of the cohesion funds, to be able to implement the different kinds of the key. Now it's much more of a policy instrument. So that is one thing. Then you mentioned in the last question about is the relationship between the cohesion, conditionality, and so on. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is now the mechanism which will be kind of triggered down to the candidate countries. You know, whenever we talk about some policy which is introduced in the EU member states, they are typically one way or another trickled down to the candidate countries as well. I have a little bit of experience with these economic reform programs. You know, if you look conceptually, they are lighter version of what we are doing in the member states for this macroeconomic governance. So very useful, and where I consider this instruments useful as a process, not only just as an outcome.
Thank you so much for the answer. I would like to go back to Mrs. Jurovic. Sorry for the interruption that we had. So let's focus on this question that was about the more often and more regular monitoring and evaluation, and maybe placing the sector budget support or direct budget support that Professor Mojmir mentioned, whether this instrument would get a larger attention, let's say, in a new and upcoming financial framework due to these efficiency and effectiveness oriented goals.
Yeah, I can agree fully with this conditionality criteria. I expect also that they will be even stronger, and it is somehow announced. I think even European Commission with this methodology in reports is very skilled in developing open composite indicators of the progress and performance indicator for specific issues. So they will use it also for the evaluation of IPA and for the concrete actions. Other aspect also is that monitoring evaluation will be probably even frequent, and we hear voice of the NGOs. They like to be part on even of the committee structure and their regular meetings. And what I also expect in the context of further monitoring and implementation process, that they will be linked with the public finance management and macroeconomic characteristic of each government and their policies. So in that context, direct budget support is very convenient model for the Commission, and in some countries is well accepted. For instance, in Albania, they have, I think, 6 direct budget supports. They are working on 7 months. I think it is the biggest number of that model in one country. But also in other, I think even in each country, it is strongly recommended by European Commission to have direct budget support for public administration reform. The horizontal issue, it is the capacity building, administrative criteria. It is a good model for monitoring because after fixed tranche, you have those 2 variable tranches, and they are linked with the achievement of jointly agreed indicators. So I add also that budget support will continue to be strong instruments for the implementation of the program because of this flexibility of implementation, but goals and indicators are defined. So it will be easy for monitoring, and of course to reduce amount of money in the case that some indicators are not achieved. So I think that it will be also very, very frequently proposed as a model by EU side.
For the questions also that we have received, but also for the answers, since we are at the very end of the time that we have envisaged for this webinar, and we would not like to break it according to our rules, I would like now officially to thank you for your presentations delivered, but also for your participation at the webinar. I also like to emphasize that all of the additional questions that you as a participant would like maybe to ask our lecturers, you are more than welcome to send them, and we will accordingly address these questions, send you an answer. So feel free just to contact us, and we will in a very short time provide you the answer or tell you how to or whom to contact else to find it. In that, I would like to conclude this webinar with a very few directions. First, as I said at the beginning, the recording of this webinar will be available. I will send it to you also in a coming few days. In this email, you will also see an evaluation form. So I please kindly ask you to fill it in, because this will give us a very significant feedback on how to further structure the webinars and what other topics you would find relevant to be covered in this format. In that later, I'm also inviting you to join us for other events that we organize. This is currently the last event before the summer holidays, but in September we continue. All of the details about upcoming workshops, online courses, and webinars are easy to find on our website on events page, where you will find all the details and application deadlines. So we are very much looking forward to see you in CEF in coming periods. Some of the online events that are coming are already in September, about the role of the Parliament in the budgeting process. Then in October, we are going to cover more analytical skills throughout the blended learning that consists of 2 weeks of online learning and a workshop here in Ljubljana when we will be discussing spend reviews. Then in November, we'll be doing audit and the tax administrations. Later on, we will have webinar on management and accounting on non-financial assets. And finally, yes, again, webinar on the Parliament's role. So in addition, I'm also inviting you to join our latest platform that it's intended for line ministries, where you can access the latest information about the PFM and tax policy administration developments. You find here the summaries of trainings and learning opportunities that are offered not only in CEF but also outside of our institution that could be useful for your work. You can find different learning resources, researches, publications that could be useful. And finally, this is the place where you can connect on a regular basis with experts and colleagues from other countries, other institutions on a regular basis. As said at the beginning, you're very encouraged to send us any of additional questions, concerns that you have on email or official email of our e-learning team. And in that sense, we are very happy to have you at this webinar and look forward to meeting you soon in the new ones. Wishing you a lovely summer in front and a lot of success with, let's say, budget preparation processes that are now undertaking in many institutions. See you soon online or here in Ljubljana. Goodbye.